It was one of those nights where the house felt too quiet, too still. The kind of silence that presses down on you, making every small sound sharper than it should be. At exactly 3:17 a.m., Mariah, a black mother of two, sat up in her bed, blinking against the darkness. The clock's red numbers glowed faintly across the room, casting a strange light on the familiar walls. She thought she heard her youngest, little Eli, stirring in his room down the hall. That wasn't unusual. Children wake at odd hours sometimes. But what she heard next made her freeze. "Mommy," a soft, trembling voice whispered, followed by a single name she didn't recognize. Loren. Mariah's heart skipped a beat. She rubbed her eyes and listened again. The house was silent, eerily silent, except for that faint, distant whisper. Her husband, David, snored gently beside her, completely unaware of the moment that had just unfolded. She stayed still for a few seconds, trying to convince herself it was just her imagination, just the way shadows and the quiet of night play tricks on a tired mind. But deep down, she knew it wasn't imagination. That name, it had come from Eli's room. Eli was a bright, curious child of 6, always full of questions and stories that sometimes seemed far too advanced for his age. But he had never said this name before. Neither Mariah nor David had ever heard it. It wasn't a friend, a neighbor, or even a character from one of his bedtime books. It didn't make sense. And yet, the whisper had been so clear, so soft, almost like a secret being carried across the dark hallway directly to her ears. Mariah stood quietly listening. Her instinct screamed for her to check on him, but at the same time, a strange hesitation held her in place. There was something off. Something in the way the name floated in the room, almost like it didn't belong to their world. She told herself to stay calm, to not let fear take over. She was a mother. She had to be strong. Slowly, she got out of bed, each step soft against the cold, hardwood floor. She tiptoed toward Eli's room, the whisper echoing faintly in her mind. Loren, Loren. It was like the name was repeating itself, leaving a trace she couldn't shake. She opened his bedroom door slowly, careful not to startle him. The room was dimly lit by the nightlight, casting long shadows across the walls. Eli was there, lying in bed, eyes wide open, staring at the corner of his room. "Eli?" Mariah whispered, moving closer. He didn't answer. His little hands gripped the blanket tightly, and his small chest rose and fell rapidly, his breathing uneven. "Did you say something just now?" He nodded slowly, still staring at the corner. "Yes, Loren," he said, his voice barely audible. He wants to play." Mariah froze. "He who, baby? Who wants to play?" Eli didn't answer. He just shook his head slightly, like he didn't understand why she couldn't see it. Mariah felt a chill run down her spine. She wanted to comfort him, to hold him close, to tell herself it was nothing, just a dream, just a trick of the night. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something unseen was in the room with them. Something that shouldn't be there. She glanced around the room, half expecting to see a shadow or movement in the corners. But the room was empty. The toys were scattered across the floor, the posters on the wall familiar and safe, the door locked just like always. And yet, she couldn't shake the presence she felt. It was as if someone or something was silently watching them from the edge of the room. David stirred in their bedroom, mumbling something unintelligible, but didn't wake fully. Mariah debated whether to wake him or deal with this herself. She decided against it. Sometimes adults dismiss what children see or hear at night, chalk it up to imagination or a bad dream. But she knew Eli. He didn't lie. He didn't exaggerate. And this was different. She sat on the edge of his bed, brushing back his hair and trying to get him to meet her eyes. "Eli, you're safe. Mommy's right here. Can you tell me more about Loren?" He looked at her for a moment, the fear and wonder mixing in his big brown eyes. "He's waiting, he's lonely, he wants to come with me." Mariah's stomach tightened. Her mind raced. Who was Loren? Why would a child whisper a name no one in the house recognized at exactly 3:17 a.m.? And what did Eli mean by "he wants to come with me"? The questions piled up, each one heavier than the last. She felt a knot of dread tightening in her chest. There was no logical explanation for this. None at all. As she tried to calm him, Mariah noticed something she hadn't seen before. The shadows in the corner of the room seemed darker, more defined. A chill ran through the air. The kind of chill that makes your skin crawl and your heart hammer in your chest. Mariah had grown up in this house, raised her children here, and yet tonight, it felt foreign, unfamiliar, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. She wanted to dismiss it as a trick of the night, a child's imagination, but deep inside, she knew this was something different. Something unexplainable. And when Eli finally fell back asleep, still murmuring Loren under his breath, Mariah didn't move. She stayed beside him, watching, waiting, feeling the shadows shift around the edges of the room. She didn't know it yet, but this night, at exactly 3:17 a.m., would change everything. The whispers, the fear, the questions that had no answers, they were only the beginning. Mariah's life, and her understanding of the world around her, was about to be tested in ways she could never imagine. Somewhere in the darkness, that name lingered. Loren. A name no one in the house recognized, a presence Eli could sense, but she couldn't see. And Mariah knew one thing with absolute certainty. They were not alone. Not anymore. As the first faint hints of dawn began to creep through the window, Mariah made a silent promise to herself. She would uncover the truth behind the whisper. She would protect her child. But deep down, a part of her already feared what she might discover. Because some secrets are not meant to stay buried, and some names are not meant to be spoken. And yet, the question remained, echoing in her mind and through the stillness of the house. Who, or what, was Loren? The next morning, Mariah tried to act normal, moving through the house as if nothing had happened. She cooked breakfast, packed lunches, and tried to hide the tight knot of worry in her chest. But every little sound, the creak of the floorboards, the hum of the refrigerator, even the wind brushing against the windows, made her heart skip a beat. She kept glancing at Eli, who seemed more restless than usual, fidgeting with his cereal spoon and glancing around the kitchen like he expected someone or something to appear at any moment. David, as usual, was absorbed in his phone, scrolling through emails and news updates, completely unaware of the night's strange events. Mariah wondered how she could explain what happened without sounding crazy. How could she tell him that at 3:17 a.m., Eli whispered a name she had never heard before? A name that seemed to belong to something or someone beyond their understanding? Eli tried to act normal too, but Mariah noticed little things. He paused in the middle of a sentence, as if listening to someone only he could hear. He sometimes stared blankly at the walls, his fingers tracing invisible patterns on the table. When she asked him about it, he would simply shrug and say, "He's just there, Mommy." And when pressed for details, he'd shake his head, muttering, "I can't tell you yet." It was unlike anything she had seen before. Eli had always been imaginative, but his imagination had limits. He had never claimed to see or hear things that weren't part of games or stories. And yet here he was 6 years old, speaking of Loren as if Loren were real, as if Loren were already part of their lives. As the day went on, Mariah's mind kept drifting back to that whisper. Loren. She repeated the name silently to herself, turning it over and over, trying to find a connection. Was it a relative? Someone from their past? A friend of Eli's? She racked her brain, but it didn't fit. There was no one at all, who went by that name in their family, among their friends, or even in the neighborhood. Determined to find some answers, Mariah started digging into family records, old photographs, and letters she had stored away in a box in the attic. She pulled out pictures of her own childhood, pictures of her parents, grandparents, and even distant cousins she had never met. Nothing mentioned Loren. Nothing suggested a presence that could explain Eli's whisper. But the more she searched, the stronger the feeling grew that there was something hidden in the past, a secret that had somehow come alive in her home. At school that afternoon, Eli was unusually quiet. His teacher, Mrs. Harper, noticed it immediately. "Eli, are you feeling okay?" she asked, leaning over his desk. He nodded but didn't meet her eyes, his attention focused on some invisible point at the corner of the room. Mariah had always known her son to be bright and attentive. Seeing him like this shook her more than anything else. When she picked him up later, he climbed into the car without a word. The drive home was filled with an unusual silence, broken only by the occasional sigh or distant sound of traffic. Mariah tried to make casual conversation, asking about his day, what he learned if he played with friends. Eli answered in short, distracted sentences, but always seemed to be listening for something more than just her questions. Once home, Mariah decided she couldn't wait any longer. She needed to understand what was happening to her son, and she needed to do it before the nights got worse. She pulled out an old notebook she had kept from her own childhood, the one she used to record dreams, odd experiences, and thoughts she couldn't share with anyone. Maybe, she thought, there was something there, some clue she had forgotten, some connection she had overlooked. Sitting in the living room, flipping through pages of her childhood memories, Mariah remembered her grandmother telling her stories about spirits, about things that could linger in a house long after the people who belonged there were gone. At the time, she had dismissed them as old tales, superstitions meant to scare children. But now, with Eli whispering a name no one recognized, those stories felt more like warnings. Could Lorraine be something her grandmother had described? Something unseen, waiting in the shadows? That evening, Mariah tried to make Eli feel safe. She tucked him into bed, stayed longer than usual, and whispered reassurances she wasn't even sure she believed. "I'm right here, Eli. Nothing can hurt you." But as she kissed his forehead and turned to leave, she noticed his eyes following her, wide and serious. "Mommy," he said softly. "He's not going away. He's waiting." Her stomach tightened. "Who's waiting, Eli? Lorraine?" He nodded. "Yes, but he's not like a friend. He's different. He watches, but he doesn't touch. Not yet." The way he said it sent a chill through her. Different. Watching. Not yet. Those words sounded like the warning her own grandmother might have whispered years ago. Something was here, something Eli could sense but she couldn't. Something that was not supposed to be a part of their world. Mariah stayed by his side until he fell asleep, but sleep didn't come easily for her. She sat in the hallway, staring at the baby monitor, listening to the soft sounds of the house. The shadows seemed darker tonight, deeper somehow, like they were holding secrets just out of reach. She tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was her imagination. Maybe it was just stress, just fear, but deep down, she knew it was more than that. As the clock approached 3:17 a.m., Mariah's heart began to pound. The memory of that whisper from the first night came back, sharp and clear. Lorraine. A name no one in the house recognized. She felt a pull, an almost magnetic tug toward Eli's room, but fear rooted her in place. What would she find if she moved? What would she see if she dared to cross that threshold into the unknown? She remembered the shadows in his room, the way they seemed to shift and watch. She remembered the way Eli's small hands had clutched the blanket, his wide eyes filled with both fear and fascination. And she realized she wasn't sure which scared her more, the unknown presence that seemed to linger in their home, or the fear that Eli might know something she didn't, something she wasn't ready to face. Hours passed slowly. Every creak, every distant noise, every shift of wind against the windows made her heart race. Mariah sat frozen, feeling the weight of the night pressing down on her, the sense that something was coming, something waiting, and it wasn't going to let them go until it had its moment. Lorraine. The name echoed in her mind like a riddle she couldn't solve, a question she couldn't answer. By the time the first rays of sunlight began to peek through the blinds, Mariah hadn't moved from the hallway. She was exhausted, her mind spinning, but one thing was certain. This was only the beginning. The whisper of a name at 3:17 a.m. was more than a coincidence. It was a signal, a sign that their lives were about to change in ways she could never imagine. And Mariah knew that the answers she sought weren't going to be easy to find. As she finally allowed herself to close her eyes for a few moments, the word Lorraine whispered softly in her memory. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a mistake. It was real, and it was waiting. And somewhere in the house, unseen, something, or someone, was waiting too, patient, silent, and aware of the mother who had begun to notice. And that night, Mariah understood something she couldn't yet explain. Once a name like Loren touches your life, it never truly leaves. Days passed, but the feeling of unease didn't leave Mariah. If anything, it grew heavier. Eli had begun to act more withdrawn, his laughter quieter, his bright curiosity dampened by something he couldn't, or wouldn't, explain. At night, he still whispered the name Loren, often muttering it in half-sleep, as if calling out to someone who existed somewhere between worlds. Mariah tried to ask him what Loren wanted, why he was there, but Eli would only shake his head. "I can't tell you yet, Mommy," he said, eyes wide with a seriousness no 6-year-old should have. Mariah began noticing other strange signs in the house. Small things at first. A door slightly ajar when she was sure she had locked it, objects out of place, the faint feeling of being watched in rooms she had passed through dozens of times without incident. Nothing that could be explained logically. Nothing that David noticed, anyway. He was busy with work, scrolling through his phone and answering emails, oblivious to the subtle tension that had wrapped around the household like a shadow. One afternoon, while Eli was at school, Mariah decided to dig deeper into the history of their home. It was an old house, built decades ago, with a quiet neighborhood and a long list of former owners. She pulled out public records, old newspaper clippings, and real estate archives. She found mentions of families who had lived there long before them, but nothing alarming at first glance. Yet, as she dug further, she found a reference in a faded newspaper article that made her pause. A child had disappeared from the area nearly 50 years ago. The article didn't give many details, but the child's first name was Loren. Mariah's hands trembled as she read the words. Could it be a coincidence? A forgotten story from the past? Or was it possible that somehow that name had found its way into her home, into her son's world? She felt a chill crawl down her spine. The idea was frightening, impossible even, but her instincts told her she could not ignore it. When Eli returned home from school, Mariah tried to keep her voice calm. "Eli, how was your day?" she asked, hoping to sound normal. He shrugged, eyes flicking toward the hallway like he expected someone to be there. "Mommy," he said hesitantly, "he was in my classroom today. I think he followed me." Mariah froze. "He who, Eli?" "Loren," Eli whispered. "He was watching. Not close, not touching, just watching." Mariah swallowed hard. Her mind raced. Could this be a case of Eli's imagination, fueled by fear and sleepless nights? Or was it something more, something that had crossed the boundary between memory and presence? She wanted to comfort him, to tell him it was all in his mind, but she couldn't lie. She had felt it too, the coldness in the room, the strange sense of eyes on her in places where nothing should have been. That night, Mariah decided to try something she hadn't considered before. She lit a small lamp in Eli's room and sat on the floor beside him, speaking softly. "Eli, I need you to tell me everything you see when you think of Loren. I need to understand." For a long moment, Eli was silent, staring at a corner of the room where shadows pooled in darkness. He doesn't like the light," Eli said finally. "He only comes when it's dark. But sometimes he talks to me. He wants me to remember things I don't know yet." Mariah's stomach turned. Remember things he didn't know yet? What could a 6-year-old possibly remember about someone he never met? "Eli, what things?" He hesitated, trembling slightly. "I don't know, faces, sounds, whispers. Sometimes I dream of places I've never been, Mommy. And sometimes he's there, showing me." Mariah's heart pounded. These weren't just ordinary childhood dreams. They were vivid, deliberate, and tied to a presence that seemed beyond understanding. She realized that the problem wasn't just the nights, or the whisper. It was something bigger. Something tied to Eli himself. The next day, Mariah called her sister, Jasmine, hoping to confide in someone who would understand without dismissing her. Jasmine had always been pragmatic, a voice of reason in Mariah's life. But when she heard the story, she didn't laugh or brush it off. She paused, long and thoughtful, and said quietly, "Mariah, sometimes children can sense things we can't. I don't know what it is, but you need to pay attention. Protect him. Don't let him be alone in the dark." Those words haunted Mariah for the rest of the day. Protect him. The phrase repeated in her mind like a warning. And as the sun set and shadows filled the house again, she felt the weight of the unseen presence grow heavier, more insistent. She tried to stay busy, cooking, cleaning, running errands, but every task was overshadowed by the anxiety she couldn't shake. Meanwhile, Eli's behavior began to shift in subtle, alarming ways. He became quieter during the day, often pausing mid-sentence as if listening to someone who wasn't there. At school, Mrs. Harper noticed him staring off into corners, talking to himself softly, and scribbling strange patterns on his worksheets. Mariah's calls to the teacher yielded polite reassurances. All children have imaginary friends, but Mariah knew this was different. This wasn't imagination. This was Eli communicating with something she couldn't see. One evening, as Mariah prepared dinner, she heard the faint whisper again. She froze. The sound was barely audible, coming from the hallway outside the kitchen. "Mommy," it said, soft, coaxing, familiar. She followed the voice to Eli's room, heart hammering, and found him standing in the middle of the floor, staring at the corner. "Eli, who's there?" she asked, trying to keep her voice calm. "He's here," Eli said simply. "He wants to tell me something." Mariah's breath caught. Something. Someone. Watching. Waiting. The conflict that had started as a whisper had grown into a presence that demanded attention, that refused to be ignored. She felt torn between fear and the instinct to protect her child, knowing that whatever Loren was, it was tied to Eli in a way she couldn't yet understand. That night, sleep came fitfully. Mariah lay awake in her bed, listening to the house settle, to the soft sounds of Eli breathing in the next room. The shadows seemed to move differently now, stretching longer, curling tighter around corners. She couldn't shake the feeling that Loren was here, in the house, closer than ever before. And the question that had haunted her since the first night returned, louder and more urgent. Why Eli? Why now? As she drifted into a restless sleep, her mind replayed the events of the past days. The whisper at 3:17 a.m. Eli's fear, his fascination, his strange knowledge of things he shouldn't know. The shadows, the cold presence, the feeling of being watched. And most importantly, the name that had changed everything, Loren. Mariah realized that the conflict wasn't going to be solved by ignoring it or hoping it would go away. Loren was here for a reason, and that reason had something to do with Eli. But what? And how could she protect him from something she didn't fully understand? The house seemed to hold its breath that night, every creak of the floorboards and rustle of the curtains amplifying the tension. Mariah knew that whatever was coming next wouldn't be subtle. The whisper, the presence, the name, it was all building towards something inevitable, something she had to face. And she had no choice but to confront it, for Eli's sake and for her own. As the clock ticked closer to the hour she dreaded, Mariah understood one undeniable truth. Once a name like Loren enters your life, it refuses to leave quietly. And whatever was waiting in the shadows had plans, and they were only just beginning to unfold. The nights grew darker, heavier, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Mariah could feel it in every room, in every shadow that seemed too long, too still. Eli's whispers of Loren became more frequent, more urgent, like a tide slowly creeping over the edges of a calm shore. At exactly 3:17 a.m. every night, he would sit up in bed, eyes wide, staring at the corners of the room that had never held anything before. One night, Mariah couldn't stay in the other room any longer. She felt drawn, compelled, as if some invisible thread was pulling her toward Eli. She stepped softly down the hallway, the floor cold beneath her feet. When she reached his room, she found him standing by the window, trembling. The curtains swayed even though the air was still. "Mommy," he whispered, voice tight with fear. "He's here. He's watching closer now." Mariah's pulse quickened. She didn't want to see it, she didn't want to feel it, but she had to protect her son. Eli, she said softly, look at me. I'm right here. Tell me what's happening. He turned to her, eyes wide and glassy. He's showing me things, Mommy. Things I can't explain. Faces, rooms, places I've never been. He's trying to tell me something important. Something that happened before I was born. Mariah swallowed hard, a chill crawling up her spine. Her mind spun with possibilities she didn't want to consider. Could it be a memory? A warning? Or something far older? Far darker than she could imagine? She wanted to reach out, to hold him, but a strange hesitation stopped her, like the air between them had thickened, heavy with something unseen. Over the next few days, the tension in the house became unbearable. Mariah noticed doors that had been closed slammed shut without cause, lights flickering in hallways where nothing had been touched. Eli's behavior grew stranger still. He would stand for long stretches staring into corners, murmuring Lauren's name as if speaking to a person who wasn't there, his small lips moving without sound at times. David began to notice the changes too. He found Eli's drawings scattered across the living room. Faces, unfamiliar places, symbols that made no sense. He frowned, trying to rationalize them. It's just a kid with an imagination, he said. But even he couldn't ignore the tension that had settled over the house. Every sound, every creak, every unexplained flicker of light made him glance over his shoulder, uneasy. One evening, Mariah sat with Eli on his bed, holding his hands, trying to make sense of the puzzle. Eli, she said gently, I need you to tell me everything you see when you think of Loren, even the things that scare you. He looked at her, eyes wide, and for the first time, Mariah noticed a flicker of fear mixed with awe. Mommy, he's showing me a room with no doors. There's a chair, and it's empty. But he's in it. And he's waiting for someone to sit down. He says, I have to go there, but I'm scared. Mariah felt a cold knot tighten in her chest. That wasn't just a dream or a story. That was something alive, something real. And it wanted Eli. That night, she decided to sleep in his room, refusing to leave him alone. They lay side by side, lights dimmed, but Mariah couldn't shake the feeling that the darkness itself was moving. Shadows seemed to pool in corners, stretching along walls, curling along the ceiling. And then, she heard it, a faint whisper, just like before. Loren. It came from the corner of the room, so soft she almost didn't believe it. Mariah's heart thumped violently in her chest. Eli, she whispered, clutching his hand, it's okay. I'm here. I won't let anything hurt you. But Eli's small hand trembled in hers. He's not here to hurt me yet. He's waiting. And he's patient, Mommy. He says I need to remember things. Important things. Mariah tried to stay calm, but the air in the room felt suffocating, heavy with a presence she couldn't see. The shadows seemed to grow darker, pressing closer, as if they were alive. The hairs on her arms stood on end, her stomach knotted with fear. She knew that something was coming, something she could not ignore, and that whatever it was, it had chosen Eli for a reason she didn't yet understand. Over the following days, small events escalated. Objects moved on their own. Eli's toys rearranged, books pulled from shelves, doors left wide open when they were certain they had been shut. Sometimes, late at night, Mariah heard footsteps pacing through the hallway, soft but deliberate. Sometimes it was Eli who heard them first. He's walking, Mommy, Eli would whisper. Around the house. Watching. Mariah began keeping a journal, noting every odd occurrence, every whisper, every shadow she couldn't explain. She wrote down everything Eli said about Loren, the names, the places, the things he remembered that had never been part of their lives. She even tried filming at night, capturing the small flashes of movement, the faint disturbances in the air, the subtle shifts that didn't belong. And then came the night that changed everything. Mariah was awakened by the sound of Eli's voice, louder, more urgent than before. She jumped out of bed and ran to his room. He was standing in the middle of the floor, staring at a wall she hadn't noticed before. A cold draft seemed to pour from it, chilling her to the bone. Mommy, he's here, Eli said, voice trembling. He says it's time. Mariah froze. Time for what, Eli? He says. I have to go to him. He's waiting in the room. The one with no doors. Her chest tightened. That phrase, the room with no doors, echoed in her mind like a warning. She wanted to protest, to pull him close, to tell him he couldn't go. But the fear in his eyes, the seriousness in his small face, made her realize he wasn't just imagining this. Something was reaching out for him, something beyond explanation, something tied to the past and to the name Loren. She glanced around the room, heart racing. The shadows had thickened, moving like liquid across the walls. The temperature had dropped suddenly, cold pressing against her skin. She could feel it, the presence, watching, patient, waiting. And she knew that whatever was coming, it wasn't going to wait for her to understand. Eli's whisper came again, trembling but insistent. Mommy, I think he's here, really here. Mariah's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to protect him, but she felt powerless. She didn't know what Loren wanted, why he had chosen Eli, or what the next step would be. And that uncertainty, terrifying, suffocating, was worse than any visible threat. Hours passed like minutes, each one heavy with anticipation. Every sound seemed amplified, the creak of the floorboards, the rustle of curtains, the whisper of air against the walls. Mariah couldn't leave Eli's side. She held him close, feeling the rapid rise and fall of his chest, knowing that whatever was happening, it was building to something. Something she couldn't yet control. And as the clock approached 3:17 a.m. once again, the tension reached its peak. The air felt electric, the shadows alive. The whispers of Loren grew louder in her mind, though she couldn't pinpoint the source. She realized that the moments ahead would demand courage beyond anything she had ever known. The unknown was about to cross fully into their world, and she had no choice but to face it. Mariah knew one thing for certain. The calm was over. The presence that had been lurking, waiting, watching, was about to make itself undeniable. Whatever happened next would change everything, and there would be no turning back. Loren had reached a tipping point, and the family was standing on the edge of something they couldn't yet see, couldn't yet understand, but would soon feel in every shadow, every whisper, and every heartbeat. The house had never felt so alive and yet so empty at the same time. Mariah sat in the dim light of Eli's room, her hand gripping his small one tightly, her mind racing. Every shadow seemed to twitch with intent, every faint sound sharp enough to make her jump. She had convinced herself she understood the danger, that Loren was a presence Eli could sense and that she could protect him from. But as the night dragged on, she realized she had been wrong. Just as the clock ticked closer to 3:17 a.m., Eli stiffened in her grip. Mommy, something's different tonight, he whispered, voice barely audible. Mariah looked at him, puzzled and worried. What do you mean, baby? He's not alone, Eli said, eyes wide and fixed on the corner of the room. There's someone else with him. I don't know who, but it's not like him. It's wrong. Mariah's stomach sank. She had feared this escalation but hadn't expected it to happen so suddenly. A second presence. If Loren was already dangerous, what could it mean that someone or something else had arrived? The shadows in the corner seemed to deepen, stretching along the walls unnaturally, curling toward Eli like fingers reaching for him. Mariah's breath hitched as she felt an icy draft sweep the room, cold enough to raise goosebumps on her arms. The whisper came again, soft but distinct, and this time it was different. It wasn't just Loren. It was two voices, overlapping, one calm and coaxing, the other sharp and urgent. Eli, Eli, they said together, almost like a warning she couldn't fully understand. Mommy, Eli said, voice shaking. They're talking to me at the same time. I don't know what to do. Mariah's heart pounded in her chest. She had felt helpless before, but now it was worse. Two presences, one unseen and one unknown. Whatever this second figure was, it wasn't just a companion to Loren, it was a threat. She could feel it, heavy and insistent, like the air itself was pressing down on her. She tried to speak, to calm Eli, but her words faltered. Eli, listen to me. You're safe. You're right here with me. Nothing can take you. Before she could finish, a loud thump echoed from the corner of the room, making her jump. The shadows seemed to shift violently, as if something had moved inside them. Eli gasped, clutching her hand tightly. Mommy, he's there, fighting. Mariah froze. Fighting? What did that mean? Loren and this new presence, whatever it was, were fighting over her son? The thought was unbearable, terrifying in a way she couldn't put into words. She felt trapped, powerless, forced to witness something she had no control over. In a sudden moment of clarity, Eli's whisper pierced the room. Mom, I remember something. I know who Loren is now. And who the other one is. Mariah's breath caught. What do you mean, Eli? Who? Eli's lips quivered as he struggled to form the words. Loren, he's someone from before. Someone who didn't stay here. And the other one is trying to stop him. They're connected. To me and to you. Mariah felt the room tilt around her. Someone or something connected to their family, to Eli, to her. She tried to process it, tried to make sense of the impossible. Could it be that Loren wasn't just a spirit or a presence, but tied to a hidden truth in their family's past? And this second presence, could it be trying to protect Eli, or something else entirely? A cold wind swirled in the room, carrying with it a faint sound like whispering voices layered over each other, urgent and pleading. Mariah shivered, suddenly realizing that the stakes were far higher than she had imagined. This wasn't just about whispers in the night or a shadowy figure watching Eli. This was about something older, deeper, and far more dangerous than anything she had faced. Her mind raced back to the newspaper article she had found, the child named Loren who had disappeared decades ago. Could it be that the past wasn't past at all? Could it be that Lauren's presence was tied to that event, and now some unseen force was trying to correct or challenge it? The possibilities twisted in her mind, frightening and impossible to fully understand. Eli's small voice broke through her thoughts again. Mommy, they're showing me things now. Faces I've never seen, rooms I've never been in, people calling my name and yours. Mariah's chest tightened. Her own name? Whatever was happening, it wasn't just about Eli. It was about her too. And suddenly, the reality of the situation hit her fully. Their home, their lives, everything they knew was now caught in something far beyond normal understanding. Loren was not alone, and the second presence, whatever it was active, aware, and determined. She tried to hold him, to ground him in the reality she could see, but even that felt fragile. The shadows seemed to move with intent, and the whispers grew louder, overlapping, pressing against her ears and her mind. Time seemed to stretch, each second a weight that pushed her toward fear and uncertainty. Then Eli pointed to the corner, voice barely audible. Mommy, he's looking at me now. And he's not happy. Loren, he's angry. But the other one is scared. Mariah's blood ran cold. The roles had shifted. Loren, whom she had assumed was patient, waiting, coaxing, was now angry. And the second presence, whatever it was showing fear. If even Loren could become angry, what did that mean for her and Eli? The room darkened further, as if the shadows themselves had thickened into a living wall. The air was cold, heavy, impossible to breathe easily. Mariah felt herself trembling, heart pounding, knowing that whatever was coming next was beyond anything they had experienced. The stakes had shifted. The danger was immediate, and the line between protection and threat blurred completely. Eli whispered again, voice trembling but determined. Mommy, they're going to show me everything. They're going to tell me something important. I think I have to go to them. But I don't want to. Mariah felt a terror unlike anything she had known. The presence that had haunted her nights was now demanding more than just attention. It demanded Eli. It demanded answers. And whatever happened next, she knew, would change everything. The shadows pressed closer, the whispers overlapped, and Mariah realized with sudden clarity, the climax of their story was coming. Something was about to happen that would force Eli and her to confront truths they weren't ready for. The house, the night, the The whispers, the shadows, everything was building toward a moment she could not escape, and she didn't know if she would be strong enough to face it. And in that tense, frozen silence, the name Loren echoed one more time, sharper, closer, impossible to ignore. The room seemed to shrink around them, the shadows pressing in from every corner. Mariah's heart raced, her hand gripping Eli's tightly as he trembled beside her. The air felt thick, almost solid, charged with something neither of them could see, but both could feel. The whispers of Loren and the second presence overlapped in a strange, urgent chorus, echoing through the walls. Mariah knew they had reached the moment she had feared for weeks. "Eli," she whispered, trying to keep her voice calm. "Look at me. Whatever happens, I'm right here. I won't let anything happen to you." He nodded, eyes wide and shining with a mixture of fear and determination. "I know, Mommy, but I have to do this. They need me to see." Before she could protest, the shadows in the corner swirled violently. The temperature dropped sharply, and a low hum filled the room, vibrating through her chest. Eli's small body stiffened, and Mariah felt a strange energy brush against her like wind from another world. Then, in a sudden flash, the two presences appeared, not in physical form, but as shimmering, translucent shapes, faces just visible in the swirling darkness. Lauren's expression was both sad and urgent, while the second presence, smaller and almost childlike, trembled with fear. Mariah's breath caught. The two figures were connected, moving as if tethered by invisible threads, their focus entirely on Eli. She realized then that this wasn't just a haunting. It was a message, a story frozen in time, waiting for Eli to understand. "Eli," Lauren's voice echoed softly, impossibly close despite being unseen. "You have to remember. You have to see what happened. It's part of you, part of your family." The second presence added, voice trembling. "He doesn't understand. He can't move on until the truth is known. You have to help him, Eli." Mariah watched, stunned, as Eli closed his eyes and whispered, I remember." Suddenly, images flooded his mind, projected into the room like faint, flickering visions. A child decades ago, small, alone, and scared, running through the house. A mistake made by adults, promises broken, love forgotten. Loren was that child, lost and unheard, tethered to this world by unfinished business. The second presence was someone who had tried to protect him, failed, and had been waiting for the right person, Eli, to see, understand, and release him. Eli opened his eyes, voice steady now. "I understand. I see you, Loren. You don't have to stay. I won't forget you." The shadows flickered violently, then softened. Lauren's face shifted from sadness to relief. The second presence exhaled, almost like a whisper of wind. Slowly, the two figures began to dissolve, fading into light that lingered just long enough to feel warm, comforting. Mariah sank to her knees, relief washing over her in waves, but she held Eli close, feeling the tension leave his small body. The whispers had stopped. The shadows had receded. The room was still, quiet, finally calm. The clock read 3:18 a.m. It was over, or so she thought. Eli clung to her and whispered, "Mommy, he's gone. But there's something else. I think there's another part. I don't know what it is yet." Mariah froze, her stomach tightening again. Just when she had thought the ordeal was finished, a faint whisper brushed her ear, so soft she almost missed it. "Thank you, but the story isn't done." Her pulse surged. The house was quiet now, too quiet, but the sense of unfinished business remained. Loren had found peace, and the second presence had fulfilled its role, but something else lingered. Something unseen, patient, and waiting. The night had given them resolution, but it had also left a door open, an echo of the unknown that might return when least expected. Eli looked up at her, eyes wide but calm. "Mommy, I think I'm ready, but I feel like I have to be careful now. I have to watch." Mariah nodded, wrapping her arms around him. "We'll be careful, baby. Together. No matter what." The room fell silent once more, the shadows retreating into ordinary shapes, and for the first time in weeks, Mariah allowed herself to breathe. She knew that the main danger, the presence of Loren, the whispering, the fear, had passed. Eli was safe, and they had faced what had haunted them. But the whisper she had heard at the very end reminded her that some stories never truly end. Some mysteries stay with you, quiet, in the corners of the night, waiting for the next moment to rise again. And as they sat there together, holding each other, Mariah understood the most terrifying truth. The house had released Loren, yes, but it had left behind a warning. Whatever came next wouldn't announce itself with a whisper. It would wait, patient, watching. And somewhere deep in the quiet, the faintest sound echoed, almost playful, almost taunting, a new name, one neither Mariah nor Eli recognized. The morning after the night of the climax, the house felt different. The oppressive heaviness that had hung in the air for weeks had lifted, leaving a quiet calm that felt almost strange. Mariah moved through the rooms with careful steps, glancing at the corners she had once feared. They were empty, ordinary. The shadows were simply shadows again, and the silence of the house no longer pressed down on her chest. Eli was still asleep in his bed when she peeked in. He looked peaceful, the kind of deep sleep that comes after exhaustion and relief. Mariah smiled softly, brushing a stray curl from his forehead. The boy who had been haunted, frightened, and burdened by whispers of Loren was finally at rest. She could feel it in the air, in the way his breathing was steady, and in the way the morning light spilled gently across the room. As she sipped her coffee in the kitchen, Mariah reflected on everything that had happened. The events of the past weeks had been terrifying, exhausting, and confusing. A name whispered at 3:17 a.m., a shadowy presence, the unexplained phenomena in the house. All of it had seemed impossible at first. And yet, they had faced it together. The experience had shown her something she already knew but hadn't fully understood. The bond between a mother and her child could anchor them even in the most uncertain and frightening circumstances. David came into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes, clearly exhausted from long days at work and restless nights. He noticed the lighter atmosphere and gave Mariah a questioning look. "Everything okay?" he asked, voice sleepy. Mariah smiled, relieved that for once, she could answer without fear. "I think yes. Everything's okay now." She didn't go into all the details. How could she? It sounded impossible. But she knew the truth, and that was enough for now. When Eli woke, he seemed different. The usual fear in his eyes was gone, replaced with a quiet understanding. He climbed down from bed and came straight to Mariah, wrapping his small arms around her waist. "Mommy, Loren is gone," he said softly. "And the other one too. They're okay now. I helped them remember." Mariah felt a mixture of relief and awe. "You helped them?" she asked. Eli nodded. "I didn't know I could, but I think they needed me to see what happened, and now they're free. I'm not scared anymore." For the first time in weeks, Mariah let herself relax completely. She held him close, feeling the tension leave both of them. There was still a faint sense of mystery, the lingering idea that the unknown could return, but it no longer felt threatening. Instead, it felt like a story that had been told and a lesson that had been learned. Over the next few days, life slowly returned to normal. The house felt warmer, lighter, and somehow more alive. Mariah noticed little changes, a sunbeam catching a corner of the living room, the laughter of Eli echoing freely without fear. Even the smell of the air seemed fresher. It was as if the house itself had exhaled, releasing the weight of decades-old secrets. Mariah also began documenting everything. She wrote down the events, the names, the whispers, and Eli's recollections of Loren and the second presence. It was a way to process what had happened, but also a way to honor the truth of their experience. She didn't expect anyone to fully believe her story, but she didn't need them to. What mattered was that she and Eli understood. She shared small pieces with David, who listened quietly, accepting what he couldn't explain. Their family bond had strengthened through the ordeal. They realized that fear and uncertainty, when faced together, could be transformed into understanding and courage. Mariah felt grateful for the clarity the events had brought. Fear had given way to awareness, and danger had shown them the depth of their love and resilience. One afternoon, while Eli played in the yard, Mariah found herself reflecting on the lessons hidden in the chaos. Life, she realized, was full of things we couldn't control, mysteries we couldn't solve, and forces we might never fully understand. But courage wasn't about knowing everything. It was about facing the unknown with love, protecting those you cared about, and trusting your instincts even when everything around you seemed impossible. Eli ran over to her, smiling brightly. "Mommy, look," he said, holding up a drawing he had made. It was of Loren, but instead of fear, Loren was smiling, standing beside the second presence. Light surrounded them, warm and bright. "They're happy now," Eli said. "They're free. And I'm okay too." Mariah knelt beside him, holding his hand. "I'm proud of you, Eli. You were so brave." He shrugged, still smiling, a child finally free from fear. "I just did what they needed, and I feel like I understand more now. Things that were scary before, they're not so scary anymore." As the days passed, Mariah began to notice that the house had changed in subtle ways. The corners that had once seemed dark and heavy now felt ordinary, even welcoming. Shadows no longer twisted unnaturally. The whisper of names had vanished. Life had returned, quiet but alive, and with it came a sense of peace that had been missing for far too long. Yet even as the family settled into this newfound calm, a part of Mariah remained aware. The experience had taught her that some mysteries never fully disappear. They linger quietly, just at the edge of perception. Loren and the second presence had found peace, but the house had taught her a vital lesson. Awareness, love, and courage were the keys to facing the unknown. She knew that if the shadows returned in some form, they would meet a family ready and strong enough to face them together. One evening, as Mariah tucked Eli into bed, she noticed him glancing toward the corner of his room with a faint smile. "Mommy," he whispered, "I feel like something is watching, but it's okay. It's not scary anymore. I think they're just checking on me." Mariah smiled, brushing a curl from his forehead. "That's right, baby. You're safe. We're all safe. And we'll always look out for each other." As she turned off the light and left the room, she felt a warmth in her chest, a combination of relief, love, and quiet triumph. The story of Whispers at 3:17 a.m. of Loren and the second presence had reached its conclusion. The fear, the tension, the unexplainable events had all been resolved. The house was finally peaceful, the family stronger, and Eli had learned courage in a way no child ever wanted to learn, but in a way that would stay with him forever. Mariah paused in the hallway, listening to the soft sounds of the house, the creak of a floorboard, the gentle hum of the refrigerator, the distant chirping of birds outside. Life had returned, ordinary but precious, and she felt grateful for every small moment. As she stepped into her own room and sat on the bed beside David, she reflected on what they had been through. Fear and uncertainty had entered their lives, uninvited and relentless, but they had faced it. They had discovered hidden strengths, courage, and the power of family. And most importantly, they had learned that even in the darkest nights, light could be found if you stayed close to those you love. For Mariah, Eli, and David, the house was no longer a place of fear. It was a home that had seen the impossible, survived it, and emerged stronger. And although whispers might always linger faintly in the corners of memory, they would no longer have power over a mother and child who had faced the unknown and come out together. As Mariah closed her eyes that night, she carried with her a profound sense of peace. She knew that life would bring other challenges, other mysteries, other fears. But she also knew that no matter what came, the bond between her and Eli and the love of their family would always be their greatest strength. The night of 3:17 a.m. was over, the house was still, and they had survived. And in that quiet, Mariah understood something essential. Sometimes, the unknown is not there to harm you, it's there to teach you what you are capable of. And with that, the story of Whispers shadows, and a name no one recognized finally came to rest, leaving behind only the warmth of a mother's love, the bravery of a child, and the peace that comes when fear has been